Hello and welcome to another UK National Championship duel video, and today we are bringing on the Endymions for the first time into this series. With the structure deck upcoming in the next couple of weeks, we thought it would be a good idea to showcase a match between this deck and obviously one of the most popular decks of the current format, of course, being Salamangreats. So what kind of matchup does Endymion have versus this? So John will be piloting the Salamangreat list. It has undergone a few changes since this, obviously. He's always tinkering with it a little bit, but feel free to pick up this particular list from a dueling book. Link in the description. We can see Spinny down to 2, Reclusia in here, giving some extra access. Actually, Foul up to 2 as well is a pretty interesting take on it, giving him some more extension possibilities, plus Double Will helps out with that too. Moving on to the Endymion list, this is largely in line with the previous list that I showed before. I am trying out the Sloth engine in here with the Guard Dragon LP in the extra deck. It's actually really consistent access because you can always just put either Sloth or the Darkworm into your extra deck off your Electromite. Apart from that, just sort of token generating monsters and a whole bunch of spells in order to take advantage of that too. So let's get on with the games then. So heading into game 1, John is going to be on the left, I will be on the right, and I'm going to be trying to talk through some of the thought processes that went into this particular match, as well as just potential misplays that I can identify. But feel free to leave any comments with suggestions that you have in the comment section down below. So I believe John opened a fairly basic hand here, having to search there in order to get the Gazelle combo live with the debug. But thankfully, because he has Spinny and Gazelle, he's able to set that play up a little bit more nicely, sorry. Here he can go into the typical Sunlight Wolf. He's already dumped the Roar into the grave, which means he's going to be able to reset that. Taking advantage of a free negate if he chooses. Yep. And he hasn't had to use the Sanctuary, I believe. Oh no, he opened the Sanctuary, so he didn't have to use the effect of the Bailings to get to it. So I'm starting off with, I believe it's a fairly subpar hand. However, having the Supreme Sorcerer in hand, actually I think he's been called the Master now, with the TCG wording, means that potentially I can remove a bunch of problems at once, because I did open several spells here, but I still have to be able to blow through the one negate that he has established. The Darkworm Search is the kind of thing that doesn't tend to be interrupted, so that works off fine. And then there is a Desires in order to improve the hand, however there is a War to stop that. Thankfully, however, Desires is an activate once per turn, so I actually have a second copy of Desires. I believe I actually drew into the third copy, so this is one of those weird scenarios where running multiple Desires unfortunately goes against the maths. It gives you an awkward situation. However, you know, being able to pendulum summon out a bunch of monsters is still pretty good. Unfortunately, there was no way to make the Electromite beforehand. So essentially I'm just warming up, because Salamangreat do sometimes have a tough time with dealing with particular problems. The Electromite does come out, but there is a Ghost Ogre to deal with it. That's actually really unfortunate there. And the Bailings will stop the Jackal from being able to destroy anything. So very low on resources, given that one card in hand is actually the third copy of Desires, which was unplayable at that point. So now John is in a very strong position to be able to start pushing through this board. Stallion is gone because it was killed by the Cerberus, which triggers his Gazelle there, so he's going to be able to get an additional send off that. So in John's turn, he's going to be able to get off the effect of Foxy. He now has a ton of advantage in terms of generating a stronger board. He's actually been testing out not running the Fusion of Fire, which means he's not going to go straight for a Fusion of Fire OTK here. However, he's able to remove so much. He can get rid of both the scales with the Wolf going in, sorry, Helio going into another Helio, and then all he has to do is deal with that Cerberus, which doesn't even have any spell counters on it anyway, which means that my board is now essentially gone. I believe the last card that I have in hand is the Desires, which would be great, except it struggles a little bit because there aren't actually 10 cards within the deck that can be used in order to resolve that Desires. I think there are something like 8 cards left in deck, which means at least one of the cards in hand is dead. So he's going to push through a fair amount of damage here. He probably could have actually done more damage if he played this hand out differently, but if you have an understanding of a better way to have done that without the Fusion of Fire, please do drop a comment below, explain your thoughts on the process for how you would have achieved game-winning damage within that turn with the same hand. So here you can see one of the cards in hand I have is the Upstart Goblin and the Servant there, getting access to the field spell, and then absolutely nothing left, unfortunately. There's no way to put enough spell counters onto the Servant, so I'm going to be scooping up there and heading into game 2. So the first win goes to Salamangreat. This is something that you might not actually expect to see. We did test a game, like a full match beforehand, just to get used to both of the decks in the matchup, and found that the Endymion deck was very strong going second. Generally, it's able to establish a really strong board as long as you can find a way to play or push through hand traps, but it is a lot weaker than normal magicians versus hand traps. So you can see here the Ash is going to be especially strong against the Spell Power Grasp. We did have to use a couple of extra proxies here. So this is an Amorphage Sloth, which I've happened to draw into, and I'm able to Pendulum Summon. And I believe also LP is going to be proxied as well for this matchup. However, the Sloth is proving to be very problematic. Salamangreats have an extreme reliance on heading into the extra deck in order to remove problems. The monsters are actually relatively weak. You know, you have a couple of 1800 monsters, but there's nothing else after that. I believe the easiest out that you see for this kind of board is you have to like open one of your 1800 monsters and a spinny so that you can make your monster strong enough to actually beat over the Sloth. Otherwise it's a little bit problematic, the fact that you can't go into your extra deck monsters, which are your general way of removing issues. So he's really stuck at an impasse here. Activating spells as well puts me at an advantage given the fact that I have these Endymion cards in the scales. But it's not super strong, and also I'm also being locked out of the extra deck here. However, the Endymion deck does use a lot of tribute summonable monsters, things like the Cerberus, which is the level 6. So we're going to see John setting one here, and I believe I'm going to be drawing into a Cerberus in the following turn, which will allow me to get rid of the Sloth on field and carry on playing. So yeah, Sloth tributed away for the the Jackal King there, and then the Jackal King can remain on board and use the spell counters which are actually on the other cards to make it even stronger. The Sloth is Pendulum Summoned, so is the, I cannot remember the name of it, the Endymion Sorceress is going to come down and target the back row. It turns out to be a circle, which is going to give some more spell counters, but potentially it should have been used on the face down monster, since there are other ways to access spell and trap removal anyway, especially given that the Sorceress can bounce the scale, and then the Garuda, which is in the other scale, will be able to pop the back row. So yeah, that should definitely be done the other way around. However, we do see there's actually a Ghost Ogre that's going to be hitting the Sorceress. Which is a little bit unfortunate, makes the board slightly weaker. However, you know, Jackal backing up the Sloth is still extremely strong, being able to punch over that Reclusia and then deal some damage there as well. And John is just on too much of a clock and can't deal with the Sloth backed up by a Monster Negate, because even then, you know, his plan to normal summon a Jackal and then boost it up with a Spinny I could have just negated the spinny with the Jackal King there. Alright, so heading into game 3, John is going to be kicking things off. Slightly unorthodox opening play here. Unfortunately, he didn't open the essential combo that we see with like a debug and a spinny or a gazelle, or just spinny and gazelle. So he's having to go into this sort of more roundabout way of generating advantage here, which can be a little bit unfortunate. It's kind of an underwhelming final board that you see from this. However, there's a ton of advantage generated, so you can't really complain too much about it, I guess. He has had to use up, a bunch of the extra deck monsters, unfortunately, and he hasn't managed to put a gazelle in grave. But 2 back row, 2 monsters on board, and a practically full hand is still very, very strong to see. So on my side, you can see putting the sorceress into the scale, using the spell power grasp, which is actually really, really good. Getting a search and putting the spell counters on, plus you get the fact that you've resolved a spell, means that you can double up on your spell counters. So that's instantly 2 spell counters for that scale there. However, we are still trying to have to play through 4 potentially hand traps, 4 cards in the hand, and 2 on the field, which are doubtless going to be some kind of strong negate or response. So the shrine is being used here. I think I actually discarded a copy of Darkworm in order to use that. And we see that the sorceress's scale effect is used, summons out the Darkworm, gets the search, and then Desires is used after that. However, the Desires will be negated by the Roar. Obviously, you can't give your opponent 2 cards when you have the option to get rid of them. Potentially that could have been saved for the Electromite, but John wanted to be able to use Phantasma here. So he now has an additional Disrupt on the board, plus he's been able to modulate his hand a little bit more. But my hand is actually looking extremely strong at this point. The fact that I've already got off my Electromite, putting a Sorcerer Supreme into the extra deck, which can then be retrieved for that gate 0. The fact that Electromite gets you the draw on top of that is absolutely amazing, I'll be honest. It's still one of the best extra deck cards that has been brought out for the game. It's just so good for the Pendulum archetype. So since John has already triggered the Wolf, it doesn't matter where I place the Darkworm, which means I can place it underneath the Wolf hit. So then 2 level 7s and the Darkworm on board gives great potential for a really strong board, and you're going to see a mistake here that's actually going to be probably costing me the match and the game, so definitely learn from this mistake as we head into it. So Zephyr Metaltron and the Vortex comes out. Now here I use the Vortex effect, thinking that I'll be able to apply more damage. And this is the major mistake, because it means that his Phantasma is able to respond. For some reason I just completely blanked and forgot that Phantasma was able to respond to targeting effects. So when the Vortex does target his board, he's going to attempt to negate that targeting effect by discarding a card, and I'm going to negate that negate, but it means that when I attempt to summon my LP now, he's going to have a response for its effect, which is to, of course, Ghost Ogre it. And because I didn't have the Vortex live, it means that I can't protect it. However, if I had been able to, I'd have got out a Sloth, and as we've seen before, it's virtually impossible for Salamangreat players to deal with a Sloth backed up by a negate, which is exactly what I would have had. So massive mistake on my side there, using the Vortex effect early. I should have just not bothered with it and left it for later. And it means that John is now going to be able to play into this position, resolving his circle in order to get a search. That does put a spell counter onto the Endymion card, but it's not a huge deal at this point. All he has to deal with is a single negate, to be honest. And it's actually very, very easy for Salamangreat decks to be able to bait out a negate once they're in this position, where they have so much utility that's already in the graveyard. Once you get the Jaguar into the graveyard, you're really in a great position no matter what. But again, you know, he's playing a deck which doesn't include Fusion of Fire, which means he can't go for the typical Fusion of Fire OTK here. He's going to have to figure out a way to generate advantage whilst clearing up the Endymion board. However, he does have access to this Gazelle, which can of course make things a lot easier for him, and triggering the Wolf gets him back the Reclusia because it's a fire monster, so that's an additional summon or a pop if he wants it to be, or both even. He's sending the Rage here, which is going to completely disrupt any possible attempts to set up the Pendulum Scales. Because this deck does, the Endymion deck in its pure form does not play Pendulum Call, there's no way of playing around the Rage. You have to put your Scales in, and there's nothing really to protect them. So that is one of the main boosts of actually playing the Pendulum Magician build, or just Pendulum Magicians in general over this, the fact that you can do that. So we're just seeing some consideration about the line of play that John's going to go for. I believe he's going to resolve the circle before making the next Link Summon, because he hasn't used it this turn, so he gets himself a foul. Makes a Link Summon for the Heater, having added back that Rage there. The Heater can of course bring out the Electromite, and then he can go into the Heatleo in order to spin back a Scale. So he's just able to get himself into a better position and start dealing some damage, having spun back that Vortex with the, what's it called, Stallion, Mirage Stallion there. So now there's a very strong Salamangreat board and a virtually empty Endymion board. Scale of the Sorceress here and Desires, but the Desires will be hit by the Raw, which means no double draw and only a single card in hand, so unless it's going to be a Scale, that's a very unfortunate position to be in, and it is not, and that means that Salamangreat has come out on top. So some of the important things to pick up from this match: the Sloth backed up by a single monster negate is extremely strong from the Endymion side. If you can establish that, then your opponent is really going to struggle in order to be able to beat it. We have seen some commenters suggesting the use of Goliath. I just want to explain the reasoning for using Sloth instead, and that is the fact that you can Pendulum Summon it, because your Goliath will never be able to be Pendulum Summoned within this deck. So it just makes more sense to me to be able to use Sloth. As we saw there previously, the fact that you can tribute your Sloth and then summon it back is very, very crucial for maintaining that floodgate whilst also allowing yourself to get some advantage. But what actually came into this match and clenched it? Well, there was of course the misplay with the Vortex, using the targeting bounce effect when it shouldn't have been used, but ultimately I think it comes down to the fact that the Salamangreats were able to generate so much advantage, and remove the fact that you can use Heatleo to remove both of the Scales is very, very strong in this match. If there isn't a monster negate already present on the side of the Endymion board, it can be a little bit of a struggle to deal with it. That said, a Pendulum deck does very well in this matchup regardless of the fact that you can put so many monsters out in order to deal with the problems that the Salamangreat deck throws up at you. You know, most of the monsters are pretty weak, so if you are an Endymion player and you're able to Pendulum summon out just some big monsters, you can generally clinch a win with that. So it's a pretty even matchup, I'd say. I think it is slightly favoured in towards the Endymions. However, if your opponent is very skilled or very lucky, then you can definitely take them on with a Salamangreat list and win out on top there.